Stop acting obsolete, Terry. It's just a noisy bearing. Brent Haskell said it at 6:12 on a wet Tuesday, under the sodium-gray dawn that always made Riverbend aggregates look like it had been cast in concrete overnight. He stood on the catwalk above Crusher Line 3, with his clean rain shell, zipped to the chin, and one polished boot on the yellow kick plate, jabbing a finger toward the locked-out motor as if pointing hard enough could change metallurgy. The belt below them sat motionless, loaded with damp minestone from the night shift backlog. Water ticked down the handrails. The whole plant carried that pre-start scent of wet dust, gearbox oil, ozone, and coffee, gone stale in insulated cups. Terry Cooper did not answer right away because she had learned the most expensive workplace mistakes often began with a fast mouth and an unrecorded hazard. She looked at the red lockout hasp on the disconnect. Then she looked at the motor base, where vibration had walked a chalk mark half an inch off center over 3 days. Then she looked at Haskell. The crew watched from the platform stairs and feeder deck. Boots planted, gloves tucked under armpits, everyone pretending to check radios while listening to every word. Nobody liked being theater for a manager's temper. Everyone understood this line fed half the day's tonnage target. Haskell mistook her silence for retreat and widened his stance. You heard me. Obsolete. We don't shut down a primary train because you hear a little grinding. Terry pulled her hard hat lower against the drizzle, clicked open the rugged tablet, and made her voice carry exactly as the procedure manual required when a stop-work dispute reached supervisor level. My name is Terry Cooper. I am Senior Rotating Equipment Technician for Riverbend Aggregates, 17 years in bulk solids handling. I make $118,000 a year because I prevent million-dollar failures. She turned the tablet so the nearest crew could see the graph. This trend is from our CMMS. Vibration on the inboard side climbed from 3.1 to 9.4 millimeters per second in 48 hours. Red alarm threshold is 8. We crossed it yesterday at 14:37 and stayed above it. A few heads lifted. Luis Pena, junior mechanic, leaned in from the steps and narrowed his eyes at the screen. Haskell did not glance at the graph. He was looking only at Terry, jaw flexing, and his refusal to even look at the trend read to her like a dominance play meant to end the argument without touching the data. Graph noise, he said. You know these sensors drift. Restart the line. Terry reached into her coverall pocket and unfolded the oil lab slip she had carried in a sealed sleeve since 5:40. Rain beaded on the plastic. Ferrous debris at 640 parts per million. Baseline is under 100. Viscosity dropped out of grade from heat shear. This oil is thinning and carrying metal. That means rolling contact is breaking down. She tapped the thermal image clipped behind the report. Infrared from 10 minutes ago. Bearing cap is 12 degrees Celsius hotter than housing. Heat localized at the cap means friction source is internal, not ambient load. Haskell gave a short laugh that carried farther than he intended. You're reading me a bedtime story because you don't want to crawl in there today. The words landed harder than shouting. Terry had worked a double, everybody knew it, and she still showed up before first light to verify the alarm. Men and women on night crews respected that. Terry suspected he knew that too, and the line sounded chosen for the witnesses. To her, public embarrassment was one of the levers he reached for alongside schedule pressure and bonus math. On his clipboard, Uninterrupted tonnage for the month translated into a number she believed was large enough to buy silence. Terry felt the sting anyway, sharp and immediate. A pulse of heat under her collar that had nothing to do with the weather. She kept both hands on the tablet to stop the instinctive gesture that would have broken composure. She had seen mechanics lose arguments the moment they sounded angry, no matter how right they were. In this plant, anger got tagged as attitude. Numbers got tagged as evidence. By 6:18, rain had thickened into a fine sheet that blurred the conveyor trestles beyond line 2, and the morning startup horns echoed off the stockpile wall in flat, metallic bursts. She shifted one step closer, so her voice did not need volume. This is not a comfort call, Brent. This is failure progression. The inboard roller element is spalling. Spall means pieces are flaking off the raceway. When spall grows, friction spikes, heat runs away, cage stability drops, and seizure becomes non-recoverable. Safe path is shut down, bearing swap, alignment check, and controlled restart. Estimated downtime 6 hours if we stage correctly. 6 hours. Haskell shook his head as if she had asked for a holiday. You people hide behind procedure whenever production gets hard. Procedure is why this place is still standing, Terry said. Don't preach to me about standing. We are already behind 2,000 tons because of rain. Asphalt dispatch is calling every 20 minutes. If that train sits, trucks stack to the county road, and we eat penalties all day. He stepped closer, invading the narrow strip between motor frame and handrail. Do your job. She held his gaze. I am doing it. He lifted his radio, thumbed channel 2 so the wider floor could hear, and made it public. For record, Senior Tech refuses startup on line 3 despite no visible damage. Refusal noted. Terry took out her own radio and answered on the same channel, voice level. For record, line 3 remains locked out due to red vibration alarm, elevated bearing temperature, and contaminated lubricant with high ferrous load. Risk of catastrophic gearbox seizure under full burden. Recommendation: planned bearing change now. She released the transmit key and added to him directly, that is the complete record statement. The crew heard both versions, and the contrast was clean. Haskell framed fear. Terry framed mechanism. One of those frameworks would survive an audit. He pointed at the locked disconnect again, finger shaking now with nervous energy Terry had seen before in managers who treated hierarchy like proof. You're being lazy. That's the truth. Lazy and scared. Terry blinked once, slow. The insult sat in her chest like a weight, not because she doubted herself, but because every veteran in heavy industry knew what came next when a manager needed a scapegoat. First mockery, then command, then rewrite history if the machine obeyed for a few hours. She had seen a pump cavitate itself apart after a similar morning speech. She had seen a kiln support bearing run blue hot because someone wanted just one more shift. She had also seen people lose jobs for the crime of being correct too early. Luis climbed the last 2 steps and stopped at the edge of their circle. Terry, can I take another listen with the stethoscope? He asked quietly, trying to offer a technical bridge. Haskell cut in. No. We are done listening. Terry turned to Luis anyway. You can hear cage chatter at the inboard cap. It was rhythmic at 5:50 and rough at 6:05. Trendline confirms what your ears will hear. She looked back at Haskell. This is the moment to choose controlled maintenance over uncontrolled failure. You still have that choice. He gave her a flat smile that never touched his eyes. I have the choice because I'm the operations manager. You have instructions. Restart the line. I cannot release this train at full load in this condition. The sentence drew a quiet reaction from the platform. Nobody moved, but shoulders shifted, radios lowered, eyes dropped to boots and climbed back up. Workers knew that phrasing. It was the formal refusal language. Once spoken, the conflict was no longer personal. It was procedural, documented, and headed for somebody's desk. Haskell stepped back as if giving her one final chance at obedience. Last time, turn it over. Terry opened the camera app on the tablet and captured the bearing housing tag, the red RTD alarm on the panel display, the lockout point, and the oil report side by side, timestamp embedded. GPS stamp embedded. She attached the images to the work order draft and hit save. Then she took a marker, wrote the current reading on a strip of tape, and pressed it to the housing where anyone could compare drift after startup. She did each action deliberately, not theatrical, just complete. Evidence first, argument second. When she looked up, Haskell's expression had changed from contempt to threat. You're not just obsolete, he said. You're a coward hiding behind paperwork. The word carried down the catwalk and across the feeder deck. It was meant to stick. It did stick, in the way insults do when they are designed for witnesses. And for half a breath, Terry felt fatigue from the double shift press against her knees. Then training replaced emotion, as it always had. Machines didn't care about humiliation. Bearings did not care about authority. Steel did not negotiate with pride. She clipped the tablet to her belt, squared herself to the lockout point, and spoke in the same calm cadence she used during incident drills. Refusal stands. Hazard logged. Awaiting maintenance authorization for bearing replacement. No one cheered. Industrial floors did not work that way. But Luis gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and two operators on the lower deck moved their feet farther from the guard line without being told. Across the plant, startup horns sounded for other lines, and crushers came alive one by one in distant rolling thunder. Line 3 stayed silent, locked and waiting, while rain tapped the guard panel over the gearbox that had already told the truth to anyone willing to listen. Terry stayed by the disconnect long enough to hear the silence settle into a pattern. Rain on guard steel, idlers clicking as trapped stone rolled back a fraction. Distant motors from lines 1 and 2 carrying through the mist in a steady industrial hum. Line 3 sounded wrong even while still, because the residual heat in the gearbox breathed a faint ticking through the panel like cooling brake drums. She did not touch the lock. She checked the red tag, checked her own initials, then keyed her radio. Maintenance control, this is Cooper at line 3, requesting full diagnostic kit at location. I need root analyzer, contact probe, thermal gun verification, and drain pan. Hazard class high. Dispatch answered from the control room. Voice clipped through static. Copy, Cooper. Kit in transit. Haskell remained 10 feet away under the catwalk light, talking into his phone with his back turned now, posture stiff, one hand slicing the air as he paced. He was no longer arguing data. He was managing optics. That told her he knew the numbers were bad. Luis stepped closer to Terry and lowered his voice. You want me to crack the inspection port? Not yet, she said. We verify de-energized at the motor leads first. Rain day, wet gloves, 0 shortcuts. She nodded toward the MCC shack. Bring Mara from electrical. Two-person verification. He moved without hesitation. That small obedience mattered more than speeches. In a plant like Riverbend, trust lived in who followed sequence when everyone was under pressure. By 6:23, Mara Ivers came up the graded stairs carrying a meter bag and a face shield, rain beads trembling on her visor. Terry gave her the lockout number and watched the meter leads touch each phase at the line side and load side. 0. Mara called it out twice for the record, then signed the field line on Terry's tablet. The action took less than a minute. It prevented funerals. Terry crouched at the gearbox drain with a stainless catch pan and cracked the plug 1/4 turn. The oil that dribbled out was darker than it should have been for a mid-cycle sample, almost graphite gray under the catwalk light, with a burnt varnish smell that cut through wet dust and diesel haze. She rolled a drop between two nitrile-gloved fingers. Grit. Not fine carbon soot, not harmless discoloration. Hard particulate. Luis watched her expression. Bad? Bad enough that it should never see startup torque. She held the glove near his lamp. Tiny metallic sparkle flashed in the sheen. Those are bearing fragments. Ferrous content was already high in the lab report. This confirms active shedding. Mara leaned over the pan. How hot did it peak? RTD hit 121 Celsius and held red. Housing was cooler by 12 degrees, localized source at the cap. Mara swore softly under her breath, then caught herself. Sorry. Terry shook her head. Save it for testimony if they ask later. She directed Luis to pull the inboard inspection cover bolts in a star pattern, half turn each, so the flange relaxed evenly. When the plate came free, a warm breath of oil mist escaped and fogged the lens of his safety glasses. Terry angled her flashlight inside. The raceway surface that should have reflected smooth and silver looked peppered and smeared, with a dull torn band circling one quadrant like a worn brake rotor. The cage edge showed blue-brown temper color from heat. She held the light steady for Mara to photograph. Capture wide, then close on the race scar, Terry said. Include scale marker. Mara placed a ruler strip at the lip and shot 3 frames. Got it. Terry brought the contact probe to the housing and gave a light tap test around the cap perimeter, listening through the headset. The sound signature shifted from clear ring to a short, dead thud near the 6 o'clock position. She repeated the strike points and logged each location. You hear that? She asked, handing one ear cup to Luis. He listened, brow tightening. That dead spot sounds packed. Exactly, Terry said. Debris pooling at the load zone. Clearance is closing. If we spin this under burden, heat accelerates, cage distorts, and the rolling elements stop rolling. At 6:31, she had enough to classify it beyond advisory. She opened a new work order status and selected imminent mechanical failure. Then attached the fresh photos, meter verification, drain sample video, and tap test audio clip. She read the summary aloud as she typed so the 2 witnesses could confirm. Inboard bearing exhibits active spall, thermal distress, metallic contamination, and probable cage deformation. Immediate replacement required. Startup prohibited pending corrective maintenance and alignment verification. Luis exhaled through his nose. How long if we do it right? 6 hours if parts are in cage B and crane is available. 8 if we need machine shop polish on the shaft shoulder. Longer if we pretend and pay later. Mara glanced toward Haskell, still pacing. He's going to push. He can push paper, Terry said. He cannot push this bearing back into shape. A forklift rumbled past below with palletized screens, backup alarm pulsing through rain. Terry watched the operator detour around a puddle of hydraulic sheen near the storm grate and made a mental note to call environmental after this task. On wet days, one bad decision tended to attract another. Risk stacked fast when supervision was distracted. She turned back to the gearbox and marked the coupling hub with paint pen at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock positions. Luis, set up dial indicators. I want cold alignment numbers before disassembly. He nodded and retrieved the magnetic bases. While he worked, Terry scanned the motor foot and found another contributing factor she had suspected from the chalk movement. The outboard rear hold-down bolt had backed off, nearly 3 threads, and the shim pack carried fretting rust at the edge. Not the initiating fault, but enough to amplify vibration once the bearing roughened. She photographed it with a coin for scale and added the image to the same hazard log. Loose foot condition present, she said quietly, mostly to herself, then louder for record. Secondary amplifier, not root cause. Documented. The distinction mattered. If she mislabeled the sequence, management could claim the whole event came from poor tightening discipline and dodged the core issue of ignored bearing data. She had learned to separate trigger from multiplier, cause from noise. At 6:38, dispatch called again. Cooper, operations wants estimate for restart window. They're asking if partial feed is viable. Terry pressed transmit. Negative on partial feed. Bearing failure mode is load sensitive and speed sensitive. Reduced tonnage still rotates at near full RPM in this train. No safe operation until bearing swap complete and post-repair vibration baseline established. Copy, dispatch said, with the hesitant tone of someone relaying bad news up a chain that did not like bad news. Haskell ended his phone call and finally approached the open inspection port. He kept his hands off the machine, perhaps because Mara's camera was still up. You done performing? He asked. Terry did not rise to the tone. She rotated the flashlight so he could see the damaged race. This is spall progression and heat smear. You can see metal transfer on the contact path. We are beyond monitoring. We are at intervention. He squinted, then dismissed it with a shrug. Looks like scratches. Scratches are superficial, Terry said. This is material loss with raised lips and discoloration from friction. Rolling elements hit this area every revolution. At 1780 revolutions per minute, that is 29 impacts per second on each defect zone, per element pass frequency. Defect grows geometrically, not linearly. He folded his arms. You always make it sound dramatic. She pointed to the sample pan. That glitter is your bearing turning into abrasive paste. It circulates through the oil, eats surfaces, builds more heat, and strips film strength. Once lubricant film collapses, steel touches steel. After that, this gearbox decides the schedule, not us. For the first time that morning, he looked uncertain. But the uncertainty lasted only a second. His eyes shifted to the running conveyors in the distance, to the stockpile line of waiting trucks beyond the fence, to whatever performance metric sat behind his forehead, like a metronome. Just clean it and run light, he said. Mara spoke before Terry could answer. With respect, Brent, electrical has red tag authority when thermal protection is an alarm and mechanical has failure evidence. We can't clear this. He gave Mara a tight smile that carried no warmth. I didn't ask electrical for policy. Terry stepped between the open port and the conversation, Not aggressive, simply procedural. Then ask physics, it already answered. The exchange ended there because Luis called out from the coupling side. Terry, alignment's off. 14 thou vertical at the motor, 8 horizontal. Terry crossed to him and checked the dial faces herself. The needle fluttered with each light hand turn, a roughness transmitting through the shaft. Even without power, she felt it in her palm, a granular drag at one point in the rotation, then freer movement, then drag again. Periodic binding. Another red flag. Record full sweep, she said. Include rotational resistance note. By 6:46, rain had eased to a mist, and the dawn shifted from gray to a flat white that made every wet surface glare. Terry called storeroom on direct line. Need one inboard spherical roller bearing for GBX3, spec 90 mil bore, cage type E1, and 2 liters flush oil for interim cleaning. Confirm stock. A pause, keyboard clatter, then, one bearing in stock, sealed. You're lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it, Terry said. Hold it at cage B counter. I'm assigning pickup to Pina. She ended the call and entered the part reservation number in the work order, so no one could reroute it to another job. That single line of admin could save an hour of argument later. Luis looked up from the indicator stand. You want me to pull it now? Yes. Bring the bearing, new seals, and gasket sheet. Also grab the shaft sleeve kit in case the journal is scored. She paused, then added, and coffee if the machine shop still has any left. He managed a brief grin and trotted down the stairs. Terry remained with Mara at the open housing, while Haskell stood off to the side, silent now, checking his phone every few seconds. The quiet gave Terry room to feel the fatigue she had been suppressing since dawn. The ache at the back of her neck, the grit in her eyes from the double shift, the tiny tremor in her forearm that came after too much adrenaline. She acknowledged it and parked it. Process first, body second. She dictated an additional note for the record. Inspection at 0 energy confirmed advanced bearing distress visually and by debris sampling. Secondary misalignment and loose foot evidence present. Startup authorization denied by maintenance pending corrective action. Witnesses, Ivers, Pina. Mara lowered the camera. You think he'll still try to spin it? Terry watched Haskell from the corner of her eye. His jaw worked as he read a message, thumb tapping hard enough to shake the phone. He'll try to find language that moves responsibility off his desk, she said. That's what people do when numbers go red. And if he orders override? Terry answered without hesitation. Then the log carries the truth, and everyone on this deck knows where to stand. She replaced the inspection cover loosely to keep rain out, leaving 2 bolts hand tight so it could reopen fast when Luis returned. The catwalk vibrated under their boots from other lines, ramping throughput. A constant reminder that production pressure never stopped. It only shifted lanes. Beneath that vibration, Line 3 remained inert, tagged, and waiting for the only cure that mattered. Steel out, steel in. Alignment true, restart controlled. Terry wiped her gloves on a rag, checked the red alarm still glowing on the panel, and felt the same hard certainty settle in her chest that had carried her through 17 years of rotating equipment. The hazard had been identified in plain sight, in numbers, in sound, in metal flakes, caught on nitrile. No title in the plant could argue it away. Haskell slid his phone into his jacket pocket and took 2 deliberate steps toward the disconnect. as if proximity could reset authority he had already lost to the evidence on Terry's tablet. "Close it up," he said. "We're starting in 10. Terry did not move. Rain hissed on the corrugated roof above the catwalk, and a loader horn barked twice from the stockyard. She could feel Mara watching her, waiting for whichever sentence would become the official line in the log. Terry spoke at normal volume, not for drama, but because calm language survived review better than raised voices. Startup remains denied. The inboard bearing has active spall, thermal distress, and lubricant contamination. If we energize at operating speed, the defect zone will hammer itself into seizure. Haskell held up a hand. "Enough with the textbook." "It is not a textbook," Terry said. "It is the failure path. Rolling element hits damaged raceway. Friction increases. Oil film collapses. Cage destabilizes. Bearing locks. Then torque spikes into the coupling." He gave a short exhale through his nose, half laugh, half challenge. "You want to be right more than you want this plant running." Terry met his stare without blinking. She had seen that accusation before in different uniforms, different facilities, same pattern. Competence got reframed as ego whenever numbers contradicted hierarchy. "I want this plant running tomorrow," she said, "not burning itself down today." Mara shifted her weight and clipped her meter leads back into the bag, an audible click in the narrow space. Haskell turned to her. "Electrical is clear, right?" Mara did not hesitate. "Electrical verified 0 energy for inspection. We did not clear startup." "So clear it now." "Cannot," Mara said. "Thermal alarm remains red and mechanical has documented imminent failure." Haskell's jaw tightened. He swung back to Terry. "You're holding production hostage over noise and glitter in a drain pan." Terry crouched, tipped the sample pan slightly, and let the catwalk light catch the suspended particles again. "This is hardened steel from the bearing path. Not dust, not harmless. These fragments circulate through the mesh, score surfaces, and accelerate heat. It's self-feeding damage." He looked away from the pan, refusing the visual anchor she offered. "I asked for action, not theater." She stood and keyed her radio. "Maintenance control, Cooper at line 3. Confirm work order status IM 3472. 2 is coded startup, prohibited pending bearing replacement." Dispatch answered after a short static burst. "Confirmed, Cooper. IM 3472. 2 shows red hold, supervisor acknowledgement pending." Terry kept the transmit key down 1 second longer. "Log verbal from operations manager. Startup command issued despite red hold." "Logged," dispatch said, voice flatter now, aware of where this was heading. Haskell stepped closer, close enough Terry smelled mint gum over wet nylon. "You just made this political." "No," Terry said. "I made it traceable." By 6:52, the drizzle had thinned to mist, and the first outbound trucks were already stacking near Gate 2, tarps snapping in crosswind while loaders fed the other lines harder to compensate. Luis reappeared on the stair run carrying the sealed replacement bearing box against his chest, gasket roll under one arm, shaft sleeve kit hanging from 2 fingers. Hanging from him, he looked from Terry to Haskell and instantly understood the atmosphere from their faces alone. "Parts are here," he said, breathing hard. "Storeroom sign transfer. What's first?" "Set the chain fall over the motor side and stage the puller," Terry said. "We're proceeding with replacement." Haskell cut across her words. "No, you're not. Put that box down and reinstall the guard." Luis froze. The gasket roll slipped and thumped against the grating. Terry took one step toward him. "Luis, hold position!" Haskell snapped. "I'm talking to my mechanic." Terry didn't raise her voice. "He is assigned under maintenance permit IM 34722. The permit scope is bearing change." "The scope changed," Haskell said. "By me." Terry opened the permit on her tablet and angled it so both men could see the signature blocks. "Scope changes require hazard reassessment and dual sign-off under Procedure M14. You have neither?" Haskell pointed at her screen but did not touch it. "I don't need your permission to run my line." "You need mechanical release. It is denied." For a moment, no one on the catwalk moved. Down on the feeder deck, two operators had drifted closer to hear. One pretended to check an idler guard bolt. The other held his radio at chest level with the volume turned low. Terry registered both positions automatically. Witnesses mattered when language got rewritten later. Haskell keyed Channel 2, making sure the floor heard him. "All Line 3 personnel, stand by for startup on my authority. Maintenance delay is over." Terry keyed in immediately after, same channel, clear and measured. "Correction for record. Mechanical release not granted. Hazard class remains high due to verified bearing distress. Personnel maintain exclusion zone." The radios across the deck crackled with silence after that exchange. Nobody wanted to be first to answer. Haskell dropped his hand and spoke directly to Luis. "Guard. Now." Luis swallowed. "Brent, the raceway looked torn. We all saw it. Did I ask for a seminar?" "No, sir." "Then do your job." Terry stepped between Luis and the guard panel. "He is doing his job by not assembling an unsafe train." Haskell's face reddened. Not from exertion, but from losing control in front of hourly crews. "Move." "No." That single syllable landed harder than shouting. Terry felt her pulse in her wrists, but her voice stayed level. "Failure mechanism is active. At operating speed, the defect impact frequency will rise, oil temperature will spike, and seizure will occur under load. Restart is a direct path to mechanical breakage." He laughed once, sharp. "You think saying it slower makes it true?" She held up her gloved hand and counted with 2 fingers. "We have 3 independent indicators: vibration over red threshold, RTD over red threshold, and physical debris with race damage confirmed. Anyone would justify planned downtime. All 3 together make startup indefensible." Haskell looked at Luis again. "If she won't turn it, you will." Luis stared at the bearing box, then at Terry. Terry saw the calculation in him. Probationary period not yet complete. Rent due in a week. And a manager offering a direct order with witnesses. She recognized it because she had once been 24 on a platform with an older supervisor shouting over a pump alarm. She had complied then. The seal failed 12 hours later. Nobody died, but she still remembered the guilt like metal taste. "Luis," she said quietly, "if you touch that guard for startup, your name sits in the log under known hazard." He answered without looking up. "I know." Haskell barked, "Don't coach him, you're done." Terry keyed dispatch on direct. "Requesting plant superintendent at line 3 for stop work dispute escalation." Dispatch hesitated. "Superintendent is in vendor meeting." "Then call him out." "Copy." "Attempting." Haskell gave her a hard stare that bordered on disbelief. "You really think running up the chain saves you?" "I think documentation saves everybody who told the truth." At 6:58, Mara's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then at Terry. "Control room says operations is asking for trip relay status." Terry already knew what that meant. She turned to Haskell. "Do not bypass the vibration trip. He spread his hands. I'm not touching anything. Then instruct whoever asked. He said nothing. Terry keyed radio again, this time channel 1, where control room logged commands. Control, line 3 mechanical. No overrides authorized on protective relays. Repeat, no overrides. A new voice came through. Shift control operator Dev Singh, careful and strained. Mechanical, copy your position. Operations just requested temporary bypass for nuisance trip. It is not nuisance, Terry said. Trip corresponds to verified fault. Maintain interlock. Dev paused. Understood. Holding for now. Usika at 6:59 before any relay command, Haskell ordered lockout clearance through Area Supervisor Neil Dorsey and had control open an absent worker lock removal form. Terry immediately stated on channel that she was present, fit for duty, and did not authorize lock removal, making absent worker clearance non-compliant. Dorsey proceeded anyway under Haskell's written override, recorded it as manager authorized absent worker removal, and removed Terry's red personal lock from the line 3 group lockbox at 6:59:42. The lockbox key was then transferred to operations custody, and control logged line 3 isolation as cleared for command. Haskell took 2 quick steps to the rail and called down toward the MCC shack. Dev, execute manager order. Bypass for startup test only. Terry keyed immediately, forcing sequence into the recording. For record, operations manager instructing protective bypass over mechanical objection with documented imminent failure. Dev's reply came thin through static. Command acknowledged. Awaiting confirmation code. Haskell pulled a folded card from his wallet and read off a 6-digit override number. Terry memorized it by rhythm before she typed it. 441973. She entered it into IM-34722 notes with timestamp 7:11. The temperature on the catwalk seemed to drop, though the morning was already cold. No one spoke for several seconds. Terry heard only the distant roar of the other crushers and the soft knock of the loose inspection bolts against the housing. She looked at Haskell, then at the open guard hardware, then back to Haskell. Final warning, she said. At full burden, this box has seconds, not minutes. He answered without pause. You're relieved. Hand over your radio. Terry felt the sentence hit like a physical shove, even though she expected it. 17 years in rotating equipment had taught her that the firing threat always arrived, once data failed to bend. Still hearing it in front of crew tightened her throat for one brief beat. She unclipped the spare handheld from her vest and held it out. State cause for relief on channel. Refusal to execute lawful operational directive. Terry gave a small nod, then keyed the unit one last time before passing it over. For record, relieved after declining startup under documented red condition mechanical hazard, witnesses present. She placed the radio in his palm. His fingers closed around it like a trophy. Badge 2, he said. She held up her sight badge. Not required for safety stand-down pending HR review. You know that. I said badge. Mara stepped forward, voice controlled but firm. Policy says suspended employees retain identification until escorted off active hazard area. We're still on an open machine. Haskell snapped. Stay out of this. Not optional, Mara said. Terry touched Mara's sleeve once in quiet thanks, then clipped the badge back to her chest. I'm moving to marked safe zone as procedure requires after managerial override. She turned to Luis. Do not stand in the guard line. Stay left of the stanchion if they spin it. Haskell pointed toward the stair. Get off my deck. Terry walked, steady pace, no hurry and no hesitation, to the yellow-hatched safe box painted near the column at the catwalk intersection. From there she had line of sight to the gearbox, coupling guard, and MCC signal lamp. She opened her tablet and continued logging with hands that were almost, but not quite, perfectly still. At 7:04, 3 minutes after the override code entry, Plant Superintendent Colin Reeve arrived on the lower deck in a hard hat, still carrying a conference lanyard. He looked up, saw Haskell holding Terry's radio, saw the open maintenance kit, and climbed fast. What happened? Haskell answered first. Terry refused startup, disrupted operations, and is insubordinate. I've reassigned. Colin looked to Terry. Your statement. Terry kept it concise. Red vibration and temperature alarms. Visual race damage confirmed. Ferrous contamination confirmed. Startup denied under M14. Operations entered relay. Bypass code 4-19-73 at 700-111 over objection. Colin held out his hand. Show me the photos. Terry passed him the tablet. He scrolled through the thermal image, debris video, and close-up of the raceway, jaw tightening with each swipe. Brent, did you bypass protection? Haskell crossed his arms. Temporary. We need to clear trucks. Colin looked between both of them, trapped for a moment between immediate tonnage pressure and the evidence in his hand. Terry could almost see the institutional math running behind his eyes. If he backed Terry, production numbers cratered this shift. If he backed Haskell and the machine failed, the crater moved to legal and insurance. He handed the tablet back to Terry. I'm not reversing operations in front of the floor without corporate on the line. Terry heard the decision for what it was. Delay disguised as process. Then document that you reviewed evidence and deferred. Colin's face hardened. Careful, Terry. Careful is why we're still talking instead of calling an ambulance. Haskell cut in. Enough, I want her off-site. Colin exhaled, then nodded toward Terry. Go to admin trailer. Wait for HR call. Do not leave property. Terry stayed in the yellow box. I will not obstruct, and I will not approach energized equipment. I'm remaining here as witness until machine status changes. Colin started to object, then stopped. He knew she was within policy. Fine. Stay in the marked zone. Haskell turned to Luis and jabbed a finger at the guard frame. You heard him. Reinstall it. Luis set the bearing box down slowly beside the chain fall. The thud echoed on the grating like a gavel strike. He picked up the guard bolts with gloved fingers that shook once, then steadied. Copy. Terry watched him fit the first bolt, then the second, eyes lowered, shoulders tight. She logged each step with timestamp and spoke softly enough that only Mara heard. Replacement parts staged and abandoned by management order at 7:07. Mara nodded and, after a brief hesitation, moved beside Terry into the yellow hatch zone. If they run it, she said, I'm standing with you. Terry kept her eyes on the gearbox as Luis tightened the final fastener and stepped back from the panel. The green permissive lamp at the MCC flicked once, then held. Somewhere below, a starter contactor clacked shut in a metal box full of compromises. Terry drew one slow breath, lifted her tablet, and waited for physics to deliver the only verdict hierarchy could not appeal. The line answered in the ugliest way a silent machine could answer, with a low electrical hum rolling up from the MCC shack and into the steel under Terry's boots. The motor on line 3 did not leap. It took torque, like a reluctant animal, a deep-throated groan moving through the gearbox casing before the belt even twitched. Terry kept her shoulders square inside the yellow hatch and watched the panel lamps through rain-streaked safety glass. Green permissive held, red RTD still glowed, ignored but not erased. She stamped the time into her tablet and spoke without looking away. Startup command executed at 0708 and 9 seconds under bypass. Haskell, 3 paces from the guard, lifted his radio and put force where evidence had failed. Feed it, keep this line moving. Colin stayed beside him, arms folded, not endorsing and not intervening. The posture of a man hoping reality would bail him out of a decision he had already postponed. Mara stood next to Terry in the safe box, with her meter bags still slung over one shoulder, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the coupling guard. 8 seconds after energizing, the drive reached speed, and the conveyor took burden. Wet minus stone rode up from the feed hopper in a dark moving slab, and the gearbox note changed from startup groan to rough mechanical roar. Terry had heard thousands of healthy gearboxes at load. This was not one. The sound carried a granular rasp under the main frequency like coarse sand poured through rotating teeth. She typed one line: abnormal broadband growl present at operating RPM. Then she keyed the portable recorder clipped to her vest to capture raw audio. Luis had retreated to the stanchion line exactly where she told him to stand. He held his gloves in both hands, twisting them unconsciously. When he looked at Terry, she gave one short nod toward the line on the floor, a silent stay-put order. He nodded back and did not move. At 22 seconds, Dev's voice cracked over channel 1. Control to line 3, motor current is higher than baseline by 11%. Confirm acceptable. Terry keyed instantly. Not acceptable. Trip criteria were bypassed. Recommend immediate stop. Haskell transmitted over her. Current is stable enough. Continue. Stable enough. The phrase landed in Terry like grit in a bearing. She kept her tone clipped, courtroom clean. For record, operations acknowledges elevated current and continues run. By 45 seconds, a pale haze began to breathe from the inboard seal seam and drift under the guard lip. Faint at first, then persistent. Oil mist. Not steam, not rain vapor. Lubricant aerosolized by heat and rotational turbulence. Terry smelled it a second later. Burnt mineral sharpness with that bitter varnish note she had caught at the drain pan, now hotter, dirtier, unmistakable. She raised her voice just enough to cut through machine noise. Inboard seal is venting mist. Temperature is climbing. Stop it now. Haskell did not even face her. We're behind. Keep feeding it. A loader operator below, Boone Ralston, swung his machine toward the hopper and hesitated, bucket half raised, waiting for clearer direction. Colin finally keyed down to him. Boone, steady feed. Don't choke it. Boone answered, doubtful. Copy, steady. Terry watched the burden thicken on the belt and felt dread settle into a hard, methodical sequence in her chest. She did not feel panic. Panic scattered. Dread focused. She tracked inputs and outputs the way she had in every near miss she ever survived. Sound worsening. Mist increasing. Current elevated. Known defect under full rotational stress. Protective logic disabled by management order. The chain was complete. 1 minute 30 seconds in, the gearbox casing began to pulse visibly at the inspection bolt line, a rapid micro vibration that made rain droplets shiver and jump off the painted surface. Mara saw it too. That's not normal displacement. Correct, Terry said. Likely cage degradation and localized heating at the load zone. Dev called again, voice tighter. Line 3, current oscillation now plus minus 8 amps. We are seeing periodic spikes. Terry answered first. Those spikes align with defect pass frequency. Order immediate shutdown. Haskell overrode. Hold run, we need this train. Colin finally looked at him. Brent. Not now. Terry logged the exchange with times to the second. Around them, the rest of the plant kept moving. Conveyors thundering, screen decks chattering, truck air brakes coughing at the gate. A whole industrial organism, pretending this one infected organ could be forced to perform by command language. She thought of the sealed bearing box still sitting unopened beside the chainfall, and felt a precise, bitter irony. The cure had arrived on time and been sidelined for ego. At 2 minutes and 12 seconds, a new sound cut through the roar. Rhythmic knocking. 3 hard beats, followed by a drag. Then 3 beats again. Louise flinched at each cycle. Terry counted in her head and matched it to shaft rotation. Periodic impact confirmed, she said aloud for the log. Likely rolling element fragmentation. Mara keyed dispatch. Electrical witness concurs. Recommend emergency stop. No answer came for 2 full seconds. Then Dev returned with corporate caution welded to fear. Control cannot issue stopover operations at this level without superintendent direction. Every eye turned to Colin. Colin stared at the guard panel, rain beading on his helmet brim, indecision plain on his face. If he ordered stop now, he admitted the override was wrong. If he delayed, the machine would decide for him. He opened his mouth, closed it, and said nothing. Terry did not waste breath arguing hierarchy again. She shifted her weight toward the remote pedestal mounted at the edge of the safe zone, confirmed clear access with one glance, and slid the red emergency stop cover up with her thumb so the mushroom button sat exposed under her palm. She did not press yet. She tracked one more cycle, one more data point. At 2 minutes 40 seconds, the mist at the inboard seam darkened and thickened into a visible plume, then began to snake along the underside of the guard in turbulent ribbons. The casing paint near the cap line took on a wet sheen that was not rainwater. Oil was escaping faster than return flow could handle. Terry called it out. Active lubricant ejection. Haskell shouted down to Boone again. Do not let that hopper starve. Keep pressure on it. Boone's answer came delayed and small. Understood. 3 minutes after startup, current spikes jumped harder. Even from the catwalk, Terry could hear the motor load hunting. A rise-fall surge in pitch as rotational resistance changed each revolution. The gearbox note was no longer a growl. It became a hammering grind, heavy and uneven, as if the internals were chewing coarse aggregate instead of transmitting torque. Terry spoke to Mara without taking her eyes off the guard. When it goes, it will go fast. Stay behind the column if I call drop. Mara nodded once. Understood. Terry keyed channel 1 for the last procedural warning she could give. Control, this is Cooper. Imminent seizure conditions confirmed. Oscillating current, oil mist ejection, escalating impact noise. Immediate de-energize required to prevent mechanical rupture. Dev answered with audible strain. Copy, Cooper. Relaying. Haskell slammed his transmit key before anyone else. Ignore. Maintain run. The dread sharpened into a count. 4 seconds later, the hammering shifted pitch and climbed into a metallic scream so high and thin it seemed to slice the rain. Terry's teeth ached with it. 2 seconds after that, the entire guard jolted outward a fraction and snapped back as torque shock hit the coupling. She saw the stanchion vibrate. She saw Luis stumble 1 step backward. She drew a breath to shout, "Drop." Impact came before the word left her mouth. A hard bang punched through the catwalk. Not explosive at first, more like a giant hammer striking a steel plate from inside the machine. The coupling failed in that instant. Through the vent slots, she saw bright metal flash and disappear, teeth shearing free and whipping the guard interior. The second strike followed almost immediately, louder, accompanied by a shower of sparks from friction contact and a burst of atomized oil that blew from a seam in a hot, glittering cloud. The cloud hit the overheated casing and flashed into orange-white flame along the guard edge, a fast skin of fire racing where aerosol met heat. "Drop!" Terry shouted. Mara and Luis hit crouch behind the column and stanchion. Colin ducked late, one arm over his helmet. Haskell froze for a beat, stunned by the speed of it, then lurched backward as a guard panel section buckled and spat fragments across the deck. One jagged piece spun past and slammed into a handrail upright with a sharp metallic crack. Another fragment ricocheted down toward the lower platform where Boone stood near his loader ladder. The pressure wave was not a movie fireball. It was a brutal shove of hot air and force that slapped loose dust off every beam and drove rain sideways under the roof. Boone went to his knees on the lower deck, hands up, hard hat skidding a foot away. Two operators near the feeder stair recoiled with cries and shielded their faces from a brief wash of flame at the panel vent. The line kept trying to turn for a fraction of a second longer. Motor fighting seized internals in a choking roar. Terry was already moving. She slammed the mushroom E-stop with the heel of her hand. The contactor dropped out with a deep electrical thunk from the shack below. She hit radio while her other hand reached for the fixed suppression pull station cable at the pedestal. "Fire at line 3 gearbox, fire at line 3 gearbox, emergency stop activated, dispatch suppression now." She yanked the cable. The overhead dry chemical nozzles along the drive section kicked with staggered pops, then discharged in thick white bursts that swallowed the guard in a blizzard of suppressant. The flame collapsed to a dull orange flicker and vanished under powder. "Account for personnel," Terry shouted. Mara was already answering, voice hoarse. "I'm up. I'm good." Luis stood from behind the stanchion, shaking but mobile. "I'm here." Colin rose next, coughing from powder and burnt oil, eyes wide. Haskell was on one knee by the rail, jacket sleeve torn, staring at the dead line like he expected it to restart out of sheer denial. Terry did not look at him twice. She moved to the rail above the lower deck and scanned for Boone and the feeder crew. Boone was upright on hands and one knee, not trapped, breathing hard. "Arm hurts," he called, cradling his left forearm against his chest. Near the stair, operator Janelle Ortiz sat against the kick plate, with singed sleeve fabric and reddened skin on one wrist, where flash heat had licked past her glove cuff. Beside her, Rick Donner blinked rapidly, face sooted, both hands intact but shaking, shirt front dusted white from suppressant and gray from debris. "Do not move fast," Terry called down. "Stay where you are. Medical is coming." She keyed channel emergency. "Dispatch, 3 injured, all conscious. 1 possible forearm fracture lower deck loader station. 2 with burn exposure at feeder stair. Initiate EMS and site medic. Isolate power to entire line 3 train and lock it out at main." Dev answered immediately this time. No hesitation left in his voice. "Copy all. EMS activated. Main isolation in progress. Fire team en route. Behind Terry, the gearbox emitted a final tortured clunk as rotation fully died and locked. Silence rushed in where the roar had been, broken only by suppressant hiss, distant running lines, and human breathing turning ragged as adrenaline drained. She kept scanning, counting heads, confirming movement, forcing her own breath into control. "Luis," she said, pointing, "grab trauma kit from Station 2. Do not cross in front of that guard. Go rear route." He ran. "Mara, with me on patient check. We stay clear of potential reignition zone." They descended the stairs fast but disciplined, one hand on rail, boots slipping slightly on wet, grating powdered white. At the lower deck, Terry knelt beside Boone first. She did not manipulate the arm. She checked circulation at the wrist, asked him to wiggle fingers, got a grimacing yes. Likely ulna fracture, closed. She stabilized with a folded vest and sling improvised from a clean rag strip until Kit arrived. Janelle's burns were superficial but painful, patchy red at wrist and neck, where collar gap had opened. Rick had minor flash exposure on one cheek and small cuts from non-penetrating fragments, bleeding limited, eyes clear, oriented 3 times when she ran quick questions. Name, location, what happened? "Rick Donner, line 3 deck," he said, still stunned. "That box screamed and blew." "Stay seated," Terry told him. "You're okay. Don't rub your eyes." Above them, Colin finally found his command voice and started barking containment orders that should have been given before startup. Hot work ban across area. Spill booms on the storm channel side. Nobody touches line 3 until incident command clears. Terry heard Haskell trying to speak over him, words tumbling into excuses about nuisance trips and temporary bypasses. Colin cut him off with one sentence sharp enough to carry across both decks. "Not one word right now." By 7:19, 7 minutes after first ignition, Site Medic team reached the deck with backboard, burn dressings, and splints. Terry handed off all concise reports. Mechanism first. Fragment strike. Pressure wave knockdown. Flash contact duration under 1 second. Suppression activated immediately. Power isolated pending lock verification. She gave exact timestamps from her tablet to the medic lead and watched him write each one down. Only then did she allow herself one glance back at the gearbox. The guard was bent outward in 2 places, paint scorched, white suppressant caked over black oil streaks. The replacement bearing box still sat unopened near the chainfall above, dry under a small roof overhang. Barcode label clean and legible like evidence in a sealed case. The machine had consumed itself exactly along the path she had described, step by step, and the cost had arrived in steel, fire, and injured co-workers inside 4 violent seconds. Physics had taken the argument out of management language and written the verdict where everyone on the deck could see it. Terry stayed on her knees beside Boone until the medic cinched the vacuum splint and confirmed distal pulse a second time. Only when she heard "good cap refill" did she stand and step back from the treatment circle. Powder hung in the damp morning air, like chalk fog, turning every breath dry. The smell was a layered burn: hot oil, scorched paint, and ammonium suppressant. Above the lower deck, Line 3 sat dead and crooked in a way healthy machinery never did. The coupling guard bowed out, one bolt sheared clean, and a dark runnel of lubricant dripping down the frame toward the trench drain. Terry keyed her tablet and switched from emergency notes to incident accounting. 3 injured, all non-fatal, all transported for evaluation. she said to medic lead Shu, who repeated it back and wrote it on the triage sheet. 1 probable ulna fracture from fragment strike. 2 flash burns. Shu nodded, then pointed to Janelle and Rick. Both stable, pain-controlled, airway clear. Terry logged that verbatim with timestamp 7:22. By 7:28, the plant fire team had stretched absorbent socks across the nearest storm channel grate and laid booms along the concrete swale below the drive deck. Terry walked the boundary with environmental coordinator Priya Nand, boots crunching through dry chemical, and they traced the runoff path together. The spill had not reached open water, but it had reached the first catch point, which made it a reportable near release under site permit language. Priya photographed the sheen, placed a numbered marker at the grate, and handed Terry marker number 4 for the drip origin beneath the gearbox. Terry placed it herself and read the location aloud so the body cam audio would capture it. At 7:34, she watched Luis carry the unopened replacement bearing box into the temporary evidence cage by maintenance crib, sign chain of custody line B, and seal it with red tape. That mattered. The box proved parts had been available before startup. 2 minutes later, Mara bagged the drain pan sample, labeled it L3-G BX-O IL-0706, and logged witness signatures from both of them. Colin had finally shifted from hesitation to structure. He established an incident command point in the old scale house, assigned perimeter control, and prohibited any disassembly until photos, scans, and lock verification were complete. Terry entered with powder still on her sleeves and found 3 clocks running at once: wall time, control room historian time, and EMS dispatch time. She aligned all 3 in her log, because mismatched clocks were where bad actors hid. Colin spoke to the room without looking at Haskell. This is a full stop on line 3 and connected transfer points. No one touches drive components. Haskell started to interject, and Colin cut him off. You will provide written chronology only. No verbal directives on this event. Terry saw Haskell's face flatten into that corporate neutral expression people wore when they realized authority had narrowed to paperwork. She did not engage him. She plugged her tablet into the evidence dock and exported the photo set, thermal images, and the audio file of the abnormal run-up. The server stamped receipt at 7:41 and issued archive hash codes. She copied those codes into her notebook by hand. At 7:49, Risk Manager Eleanor Voss joined by speakerphone, and Terry could hear keyboard clatter under Eleanor's voice as she built the loss file live. Need first loss estimate in 30 minutes, Eleanor said. Mechanical, medical, environmental, and business interruption categories separated. Colin turned to Terry. Can you frame mechanical from what we can see without tear down? Terry answered in plain numbers. Gearbox seizure with internal lockup at operating RPM. Coupling failure confirmed. Guard compromise confirmed. Likely torsional shock propagated to motor bearings and conveyor take-up alignment. Best case is gearbox, coupling set, guard assembly, wiring harness, seal package, oil flush. Worst case includes motor rewind or replacement, shaft machining, pulley lagging, and structural checks. Eleanor asked, range? Terry gave a conservative bracket. Direct parts and contracted labor between 800,000 and 1.4 million, pending teardown and motor test. Silence held for a second, then Eleanor said, Understood. Business interruption? Colin answered that one, voice tight. Line 3 carries 43% of daily throughput. We are derating the whole site until bypass routing is engineered. Terry added, "Do not promise quick restart. We need forensic teardown first." 3 days earlier, finance had circulated a memo celebrating overtime reduction. Now, by 8:05, accounting was in the command room asking how to price 19 days of constrained output if the main train stayed down. Terry heard the number before she saw it on screen. Lost production, likely around 4.8 million at current dispatch commitments, not including penalty clauses. Contracts lead Nolan Pierce pulled up the asphalt customer schedule and swore under his breath when he saw the miss window. If we fail Thursday and Friday loads, they can source elsewhere for the quarter. Eleanor asked whether insurance would absorb interruption losses. The answer came from legal counsel Mara Quill, dialed in from headquarters. Coverage depends on policy compliance. If protective systems were intentionally bypassed against documented hazard, carrier may reserve rights or deny. She asked for proof either way. Terry forwarded the control room historian export showing override code 44-19-73, entered at 7 o'clock 11 seconds, plus the channel transcript where she had objected in real time. Quill read in silence, then said, "Preserve all logs, including absent worker lock removal form and relay command history. This is now litigation-grade evidence." At 8:17, OSHA reporting was no longer optional. 1 fracture and 2 burns with off-site treatment triggered immediate notification thresholds. Colin made the call with speaker on as policy required, while Terry and Priya stood as factual witnesses. He gave location, incident type, injury count, and current site status. The compliance officer on the line requested preservation of scene, names of decision-makers, and copies of safety interlock records. Colin confirmed delivery by secure portal before noon. When the call ended, Priya placed a separate report to the State Environmental Duty Desk about lubricant runoff to the Storm Channel catch point. The duty officer logged it as a contained release, required sample results within 24 hours, and warned that any evidence of delayed reporting would escalate classification. Priya repeated the case number twice. Terry wrote it down and photographed the whiteboard where Priya had printed it in block letters. External contact, documented outcome. No loose ends. By 9:03, with ambulances gone and the deck locked, the human side of the reckoning arrived in quieter forms. Luis sat on an upturned bucket outside the crib, staring at powdered boot prints as if reading a map he wished he had followed sooner. Terry handed him a bottle of water and sat on the curb rail beside him. He spoke first. "I tightened that guard." Terry did not soften the fact. "You did, under direct order after formal objection." He looked at her, eyes red from suppressant and adrenaline drain. "Does that clear me?" Terry answered with the rule she had learned the hard way. "Truth clears people. Logs clear people. You tell exactly what happened in order with times. No edits for anyone's comfort." He nodded, took out his phone, and typed his personal statement while memory was still fresh. At 9:11, Mara joined them with printed historian strips and pointed to the current spikes. "See this oscillation pattern? It lines up with Terry's warning almost to the second." Luis let out a long breath. "Then it was already over when we started." Terry shook her head. "Not over. Still preventable until the command was given." Teardown authorization came at 10:26 after regulator acknowledgement. Terry led the mechanical team in full PPE, camera running continuously. They removed the damaged guard, recovered coupling teeth fragments into numbered bags, and opened the gearbox top cover under a static lift frame. The failure mode was as predicted and worse in scale. Inboard bearing cage collapsed, rollers skewed and welded to race segments, blue heat bands on adjacent gear face, and smeared metal packed into oil galleries. Terry dictated each finding for the record. Primary initiating fault, progressed inboard bearing spall and thermal runaway. Secondary accelerants, misalignment and loose foot condition. Catastrophic outcome intensified by continued operation under bypassed protective trip. She placed the fractured cage segment on evidence map marker 12 and stepped back so photos could capture orientation. At 11:02, motor megger testing returned marginal insulation values, likely heat stress exposure from torsional shock. That pushed the estimate upward. By 11:20, maintenance planning revised outage duration to 19 days minimum with expedited parts, assuming no hidden shaft crack at NDT. The insurance carrier responded at 13:47 with a reservation of rights letter delivered by email and read aloud in command. Terry listened to each clause like torque values being tightened. Coverage investigation would proceed, but intentional disablement of safety interlocks and deviation from written lockout protocol were cited as potential grounds for denial under negligence and willful act exclusions. Quill asked if they had proof of intentionality. Terry forwarded the radio transcript, the override command log, and the absent worker lock removal record showing she was present when her lock was removed. Quill's reply was immediate. Preserve originals in immutable archive and hard copy notarized set. Colin ordered it done. Haskell asked one question from the far end of the table, voice dry. Are you saying there's no coverage? Quill answered without emotion. I am saying the carrier has already identified policy breaches. Outcome is at substantial risk. No one spoke after that for several seconds except the HVAC fan rattling in the scale house ceiling. By the end of that first day, Riverbend had a hard ledger instead of rumors. Medical cost reserve opened at $230,000 pending surgery decision for Boone's forearm. Direct mechanical replacement reserve opened at $1.2 million after motor risk and expedited freight. Loss production model stood at $4.8 million for a 19-day shutdown if weather held and reroute plans performed. Environmental reserve remained preliminary, but PREA's containment work kept it from becoming a major release case. OSHA had acknowledged notification and scheduled an on-site inspection window. Legal had issued a litigation hold covering radios, emails, work orders, historian logs, badge access, and phone metadata. Terry uploaded her final field note at 17:06. Warnings issued, evidence captured, hazard documented before startup, override executed against objection, failure progression matched predicted mechanism. She removed her gloves, flexed stiff hands, and looked through the scale house window at line 3 under red lockout tags and floodlights, silent now for reasons that no one could reinterpret. The plant had tried to buy 6 hours with a bypass code. The invoice arrived before lunch and kept growing by the hour. At 17:19, 13 minutes after Terry uploaded her final field note, HR called her into the admin trailer with Colin, legal on speaker, and a recorder on the table. The fluorescent ballast buzzed overhead, and someone had tracked white suppressant powder across the vinyl floor in heel-shaped streaks. Colin looked as tired as the dead line outside, but he kept his voice formal. Terry, this is a fact-finding interview. You are not under discipline. You are on paid administrative status until initial review closes. Terry set her notebook flat, and answered in the same cadence she used on the deck. State for the record that I was relieved after refusing startup under documented red condition hazard. Legal counsel. Mara Quill's voice came through the speaker. Recorded. Also state whether any evidence remains unsecured. Terry flipped to the inventory page and read it item by item. Unopened replacement bearing box, transferred to evidence cage, seal intact, chain of custody line B, signed by Luis Pena and me. Oil drain sample bagged as L3-GBX-OIL-0706 and placed in refrigerated lock cabinet pending lab courier. Coupling tooth fragments bagged in numbered evidence sacks 1 through 6. Thermal photos, vibration trend, tap test audio, and run-up recorder file exported to a mutable archive with hash codes copied by hand and photographed. Absent worker lock removal form captured and attached to IM-3 4722. Colin looked up at that last line. He had given Terry a loaded look on the catwalk and swallowed a sentence. Now he finished it. I should have stopped it at 2 minutes when Current started hunting. I delayed for corporate cover. That delay is on me. Terry wrote the quote down. She did not thank him, and she did not soften it. Noted. By Thursday morning, OSHA compliance officer Jenna Park stood beside the bent guard with a yellow legal pad, steel-toe boots dusted white, and a tone that didn't care about job titles. She interviewed Terry first, then Mara Ivers, Luis, Dev, Neil Dorsey, and Colin in sequence. No overlap, no side conversations. When she reached Dorsey, she held up the absent worker lock removal form. At 6:59:42, you certified absent worker condition while employee was physically present and on radio. Why? Dorsey stared at the paper long enough that even the HVAC fan sounded loud. Operations manager said execute manager override. I executed. Jenna did not raise her voice. That is not an answer to why you certified a false condition. Dorsey swallowed. Because I thought if we cleared fast, we could run long enough to get through truck backlog. She wrote for 6 straight seconds, then said, willful deviation noted. In the control room, she pulled historian logs, and Dev showed her the relay event trail with bypass code 44-19-73, entered, acknowledged, and cleared only after emergency stop. She asked for audio. Dev played the channel clips. Terry's warnings, Haskell's maintain run, the current spike calls, the fire call. Jenna listened without expression, then requested file hashes and time sync proof between clocks. Terry handed over the alignment sheet she had built in the scale house at Incident Command. No gaps, no soft edges. At 11:40, Environmental Coordinator Priya Nand met the state inspector at the Storm Channel catch point. The runoff sample returned the same afternoon. Lubricant present above reportable sheen threshold at the first containment grate. No migration beyond secondary boom line. Priya delivered the lab sheet in person to Terry and tapped the number with a gloved finger. Contained release classification confirmed. They're issuing a civil penalty, not a criminal referral. Terry nodded. And the hydraulic sheen by the loader detour I flagged before startup? Priya lifted a second report. Resolved. Separate source. Loader L12 had a pinhole hose leak. Hose replaced at 9:50 the same day. Contaminated absorbent disposed under manifest. Not connected to the Gearbox event. She gave Terry the manifest copy. Distinctive detail closed, documented, and separated from the main failure chain. At 14:12, the insurance carrier's investigator arrived with a hard case, 2 cameras, and a policy binder, thick enough to stop a door. He walked the line, photographed override records, and asked one question 3 different ways. Was the protective trip bypass intentional? Terry answered once each time. Yes. Logged, time-stamped, and challenged in real time. 2 days later, the letter came. Claim denied under willful act and safety system disablement exclusions. Legal read it aloud in command, then passed it around for signatures of receipt. Haskell's disciplinary hearing happened the following Tuesday at 9 o'clock in Conference Room C, glass wall facing the silent stockyard. Terry attended as witness, not as target. Brent arrived in a pressed shirt and tried confidence first. The alarm was nuisance level. I made a production judgment. Counsel Quill slid printed photos across the table. Torn raceway, blue-tempered cage, metal debris in oil. Then she placed the historian strip beside them. Then the lock removal form. Then Jenna Park's preliminary citation summary. Production judgment does not include certifying false absence, disabling an active protection layer, and ordering operation over documented imminent failure evidence. Brent shifted to blame. Maintenance language was alarmist. Cooper escalated beyond reason. Colin spoke before Terry could. No, she was precise. I reviewed the evidence before run and deferred action. Her warning matched the failure sequence. Luis sat 2 chairs down, hands clasped, eyes fixed forward. This was the look he had carried since the bucket outside the crib. When asked directly, he finally said what he had been holding back. I reinstalled the guard under direct order. Terry told me to stay out of the line of fire. She was right on every step. He exhaled and added, I should have refused. The room stayed quiet. Counsel Quill closed the folder. Decision termination for gross negligence, policy falsification, and willful safety bypass. Effective immediately. Security collected Brent's badge in that room. He asked Colin for support with his eyes. Colin looked down at the table and gave none. That look never paid off later. It ended there. 3 days after termination, OSHA issued the formal packet. 1 willful citation for bypassing protective systems. 1 willful citation for improper lockout control. 2 serious citations tied to exposure and guarding integrity after override. Riverbend signed abatement terms with external auditing and retraining milestones tied to executive compensation. The State Environmental Agency issued a monetary penalty for the contained lubricant release and mandated quarterly runoff drills. No one argued the science. The next month brought the delayed damage no siren announces. In a contracts call at 7:30, Riverbend's largest asphalt client invoked the missed delivery clause and canceled the seasonal volume commitment. Nolan Pierce put the phone on speaker so nobody could claim misunderstanding. You missed critical paving windows, the client's procurement lead said. We sourced elsewhere. We are not renewing this quarter. Nolan muted and stared at the table as if it had tilted. Revenue dropped in a single sentence. At 9:05 the same morning, lender relations joined by video and confirmed covenant breach on debt service coverage after shutdown, losses, and contract cancellation. The bank imposed outside oversight of maintenance governance before releasing the next credit tranche. Terry sat in the back row as technical advisor, while finance argued ratios. She watched the slide where a 6-hour planned outage sat beside 19 days forced shutdown, then beside a full-year EBIT impact. Dark irony did not need commentary. The numbers did it. When legal prepared civil defense, Counsel Quill called Terry to review the evidence ledger one final time. Every physical item was accounted for on disposition sheets. The sealed replacement bearing box remained unopened by design and was retained until litigation hold narrowed. During court-authorized release inspection, the evidence seal was cut for serial verification, which created the documented custody transfer gap that made it non-installable. Then it was released from evidence and scrapped, with disposal manifests signed by stores and legal. Oil sample L3-G BX-OIL-0706 was analyzed, confirming elevated ferrous load and heat-degraded viscosity consistent with pre-failure distress. Coupling fragments were metallurgically examined and returned to archive. Thermal and audio files remained in immutable storage. Nothing disappeared. The consent order landed in early autumn. In a small hearing room, Brent's attorney accepted terms on the record. Brent Haskell barred from supervisory duty in regulated industrial operations for the term specified, named individually in civil settlement allocation, required to complete compliance training before any petition for reinstatement rights. He did not look at Terry when the clerk read his name. Terry did not look away from the clerk. Terry's reinstatement meeting happened that same afternoon in the rebuilt Line 3 control room. New guard assembly painted, new gearbox aligned, new interlock architecture with tamper alarms routed to both control and corporate safety. Colin stood by the panel and handed her a letter. Reinstated with full back pay, effective now. Promotion to reliability lead. Site-wide authority on rotating equipment release. Terry read it once, folded it, and put it in her notebook. Authority is only useful if it survives pressure. Colin nodded. It does now. Dual key bypass requires safety and maintenance signatures. No single manager override. She stepped to the console for controlled restart protocol, this time with every safeguard live. Mara Ivers stood at electrical check, Luis at mechanical observation point, Dev on comms. Terry read each step aloud. Each person answered. Lockout removed by procedure? Verified. Trip logic armed? Armed. Baseline vibration channel active? Active. Fire suppression pressurized? Confirmed. She gave startup command at low burden, then staged load in increments while watching current and vibration settle inside normal bands. The gearbox note held smooth, steady, clean. No mist, no knock, no lies. At 16:44, she closed the protocol with the line everyone in that room had earned. Release granted, physics agrees. Nobody clapped. Industrial people rarely did. Louise gave a short nod. Mara Ivers exhaled and smiled once, tired and real. Dev logged the release. Colin signed without hesitation. Terry walked the catwalk before shift change, boots ringing on dry grating, and stopped above the drive where the old burn marks had been cut out and replaced. She rested one gloved hand on the new guard and looked down at the yellow-hatched safe zone where she had stood when command language tried to outrun metallurgy. The record was complete. The injured workers were back on light duty and recovering. The penalties were paid. The man who forced the run was gone, and the plant had rewritten its authority map around the one rule that never bends. Titles can intimidate people, but they cannot negotiate with a failing bearing.